screwed up the entire market is to the cost of goods and services. I guess I see that a lot with environmental regulation and manufacturing. How do we as a society recognize, I guess, that trade-off as regulated manufacturing basically off the continent, it's all gone overseas and created more pollution? Is there really a way to balance that?
Well, I think to some degree, I mean, we have to decide as a society how clean we really want the environment to be, and then we also need a sense of what the costs are and trade-offs are. I mean, there's some environmental issues that are going to be critically important, mercury contamination. I mean, there's some stuff out there that's really important. I mean, talking about really serious health impacts. And I think some of those you've got to say, even if it screws up economic activity, there's a pretty overwhelming argument for dealing with it. Others, I mean, things like air, I think the question is, well, how do you deal with it? And that's one where, you look overseas, you find Europe and Japan has tended to be somewhat more, have had more market-friendly very often, rules. We've tended to focus more on command and control in terms of mandating particular. I mean, one of the worst examples was in terms of sulfur, putting scrubbers on, basically power production. It came at the behest of Robert Byrd, who wanted to protect high sulfur coal miners in West Virginia, and it prevented people from using low sulfur coal mine out in the West. There are a number of these things. In fact, we have alternatives. So the best thing to do is for us to kind of open up the kind of the means of compliance and get a sense for what those costs are, and recognize, and we're going to have to make some judgments. I mean, the good thing is with multinationals is very often multinationals apply pretty much the same standards internationally. Part of it's because of their reputation. Part of it's because it's just easier. If you're operating all over the world, they're not going to save enough money on really lowering standards real heavily over here. You just got to have a standard. I mean, the real problem in terms of third world, is going to be kind of legal regimes and a lot of other things that are going to be the real. If you can get low-cost labor and have a fairly stable political environment, that's going to draw you in probably almost irrespective of environmental. But if you can't get the stable political and legal regime, then even if it's low-cost labor, there's a good chance you're not going to love it. When you look around the world, you see some of these. Who wants to have a factory in Egypt right now? Some of these things, suddenly you find these risks very high. But I think it's an issue of trade-offs. The critical thing is to recognize the cost we are incurring. You don't want to hide it. What you want to do is you want it to be very explicit so people understand and then say make the choice. That's what I argue things such as paying for regulation is, look, this may very well be worth it, but then let's make sure we believe it's worth it. We don't kind of hide it and then dump it on somebody over there, but instead we say, okay, let's as a society confront this and decide what we're willing to spend.
I've been a witness to one of those strange kind of a quirk of the Endangered Species Act where in western New Jersey, right now there's a product to restore rail service to Scranton to alleviate some of the congestion on Route 80. And just assuming that the rail would be more efficient in terms of carbon emissions and things like that, getting it done a little faster would be a little better. So they're working on the first section that's out of Hackettstown, and they found two things, but the one that I thought was most interesting was they found that along the route, which is completely built, like the bridges, the fills, it's completely built. The only thing that's missing is the rail. They found that a certain endangered species of bat was breeding there for a certain amount of time. And I think all that's important. It's just that I think that getting this route built is also a really important environmental value. And the presence of the bat has made the process of weeding and clearing the shrub from the right-of-way a lot more expensive and a lot more it's just made the whole process harder, where I would think you'd have a good trade-off. And plus, I'm not a biologist, but I'd be hard-pressed to believe that this project would so disrupt the breeding habits of the bat that it would really go extinct. So I think there's definitely some room for exceptions, especially when certain projects have a lot of environmental merit. The second question is, are we kind of our own worst enemy in a certain way? Because the way federal land is used is subject to politicians, and you've mentioned how certain politicians can behave badly in terms of their stewardship of those properties. But they're subject to us. they do what they feel we want and what will get them votes and will enable them to continue to be in their jobs. So in a certain way, are we our own worst enemy in that we're encouraging some of these behaviors, but also, we think we want certain things, but we also are encouraging certain bad behaviors on behalf of our politicians?
On the first point, I mean, the trade-offs, I mean, are even within kind of environmental amenities. I mean, the issue of do you want like wind power or not? When they suggested putting wind power off of Massachusetts on Hyannisport, the Kennedy family was not impressed because it would ruin the vista. Well, I mean, that's an environmental amenity, to be sure. The question is, what's the trade-off? I mean, wind power tends to be bad for birds, particularly raptors. Blades going around, you get a lot of carnage in terms of birds. So, I mean, this is just one of those inevitable trade-offs. So I think you're right. I mean, the problem with endangered species is it's kind of indiscriminate. So, some projects you might argue, well, you don't need another restaurant, but how about a rail system? How about, we've had cases like building a road to an Indian reservation in terms of connecting to a hospital. Well, that's probably pretty high priority, but it's interfered with because of endangered species. How important is that? I mean, I think that's right. I mean, again, you have these competing values. It's pretty hard to make that balance, and what's really important is not to be absolutist. I mean, I think that's where you want trade-offs. The second point, I think the critical thing on politics is what I call public choice economics. That it's the question of disproportionate interest groups. So yeah, at some level we're at fault, but the reality is something that cost all of us a nickel, we're not going to run down to Washington and lobby. But if you're the affected industry group, labor group, whatever it is, I mean, that's why do we have farm subsidies? Why we can go down the list of these weird things that we have. It's because it matters a huge amount to a small group of people, and they organize. And they show up, and they give money on it, and they vote on it. Most of us won't vote on these broad issues. So it's a problem of the political system. So yeah, I mean, it's our fault, though there's a reason for it, and it's hard to get around. Because I'm a policy nerd, I care about this stuff. Most of you probably are going to have families and jobs and have a lot of things to do. You're not going to spend your entire life worrying about minutia. How do we get Americans involved in figuring out getting the right people and on the right issues? That goes well beyond environmental policy. It's a huge problem. You're absolutely right. It affects this and it affects everything else too.
Thank you very much.